pivot to my last question for you. So you and I share another thing in common. We are both converts to Orthodox Christianity. I know you have done a lot of work critiquing modern Western epistemology and theology in many ways as what led us ultimately to where we are right now in this the shattering of Christendom and our post-Christendomic West. So just from an autobiographical perspective, what led you east? And then how does orthodoxy for you, how does it provide frames of reference that can provide civilizational renewal here in the West?
Well, I was raised Protestant, raised Baptist. So by the time I was 18, 19, I wanted to get more serious about that, look into the history of the church, the history of how the Bible came to be. And that really put me in this quandary when I was a young guy looking at, well, I'm either going to be Roman Catholic or I'm going to be some kind of Protestant. Because at that time, this was, the internet wasn't really as prevalent as it is now. This was 2002, 3. So there was the internet, but it wasn't everywhere, and there weren't as many resources. So I just started looking into the church fathers themselves. I thought that was going to be probably the best way to figuring out what was the Christianity of the first 1,000 years. Because if that's what we have in common between, say, an Orthodox and a Roman Catholic. And if I was a Protestant and I wanted to know, is my church the actual historical church? Well, that first 1,000 years is probably going to be the best way to do it. So even though I didn't really know about Orthodoxy yet, I dove into these guys over here, all these church fathers back here behind me. And I didn't read all 38 volumes, but I read a lot for many, many years. And started with all the Latin fathers, got deep into Jerome, Augustine, Ambrose. And that led me to, I got to be Catholic, I guess, because it's either Catholic or Protestant. I didn't even know about Orthodoxy until about 2007 or 8. And I started reading Orthodox theologians. I had some friends online. And
so we're around the same time. Mine was 2007. Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
It took me a long time. I was really slow with it because I was like, I just don't know. I don't want to have so many conversions in my life. I just want to take it slow. So I actually studied Orthodoxy for about 10 years. I took 10 years of theological study and research. I got a whole Orthodox shelf over there, and I was back and forth between Rome and Orthodoxy. And I think one thing that helped me was when I was in my 20s, and I did have a pretty hardcore traditional Catholic phase. I went to the Latin Mass for many, many years, and just grappling for so long with the challenge of the pre-Vatican theology, but Vatican II theology and the post-Vatican II theology, getting deep into the Vatican II documents, trying to make sense of all that. And at a certain point, I just came to realize, maybe Orthodoxy is actually the option that's been staring me in my face the whole time. And so, again, even that, I took many, many years visiting many, many Orthodox churches before finally coming into the Orthodox Church. I think 2017, 18 is when I first came in officially. I almost came in 2007, but I was like, I'm not ready to do it yet. But yeah, so that's the autobiographical approach. Was that for me, it was mainly a question of historicity, church fathers, the theological trek of the East and the West, who was more faithful to that first 1,000 years of Christianity, which I think is unquestionably the Orthodox Church.
Right, absolutely. So what about frames of reference that can help us out of our civilizational crisis? What does Orthodoxy bring that's unique to that?
Well, if we don't want to get too deep into the theology, we can. But if we were just talking about civilizational frames of reference, I would say that I was kind of baffled, I guess you could say, in studying, because I have a history degree as well. In studying history, we never talked about Byzantium. Mm-hmm, so you have this giant empire that we never talked about in my secular university education. I had to go buy my own books on Byzantium and read on it and study it. We never had any classes. Nobody even talked about it. When you do philosophy, even, for example, in the secular university, you go from Plato, Aristotle, pre-Socratics, all that, maybe a little bit of Augustine, and then you skip to Descartes. You go to Descartes. Right. So nothing happened for 1,000 years? I mean, like, what? That's right. And I actually complained. I complained to the department. I was like, why are we not studying anything, early and late Middle Ages? And they were like, well, we're just told what to put up there. So it's like a top down,
Right.
presupposition that nothing was relevant in that time period, even though Byzantium was an amazing civilizational situation. So the more that I got into Byzantium and the collapse of Byzantium, actually, the more I found civilizational reference for things like balancing nation state with a larger Orthodox idea. And if you get into the history of why Byzantium fell, a big part of that was individual nation states and individual ethnophilotism contributed, not the only thing, but it contributed to the collapse of Byzantium. Right now, I'm reading a great book from an academic that's basically vindicating everything that the Orthodox position says. This is a Cambridge academic text, and it's called Radical Platonism in Byzantium. And I'm about halfway through this book, and it's actually arguing that the collapse of Byzantium through certain Platonic and Neoplatonic figures, leaving Orthodoxy and going to a kind of atheistic Platonism and esotericism, he says, is what prepared the way for the French Revolution, the socialists who were influenced by Spinoza and these kinds of figures. That's where we get the Jacobin Revolution, is out of this collapse of Byzantium. So it's an interesting thesis from secular academics, basically backing up the Orthodox reading. In fact, modern Roman Catholic scholars now are backing up, Francis Dvorak backing up the Orthodox take on St. Photius and the schism, right? Famous Uniate scholars are saying, hey, looks like actually Photius was in the right there. You know, and Vatican II is a big bunch of kind of admissions in many places, trying to admit collegiality, synodality, to admit this limitation of the Bishop of Rome in the first 1,000 years. So civilizational references, I think, can be really pronounced when we look at what's called sometimes the first Europe compared to the second Europe. Okay, Byzantium would be representational of the first Europe. And then when we get to the Franco-Latin powers, the Renaissance, those are representational of the second Europe, the second 1,000 years of Christianity, which gives us Reformation, which gives us this fragmentation. And ultimately, I believe it comes down to theological issues. There's a great book by Dr. Philip Sherrard called Church Papacy Schism, where he goes into the ideological and philosophical predecessors to the schism based around the Filioque. And that's intimately tied to the rise of the Gregorian era of the papacy. Those things go together ideologically. Right. Yeah, right. Proceeds from the Father and the Son, and then the vicar of the Son is the Pope, right? Yeah, it's almost like the rather than the Holy Spirit being in that imminent office of guiding the church, which is what Christ talks about in Pentecost, right? When he sends, I will send the Holy Spirit who will guide you in all truth. Now we get a human juridical figure who becomes and takes on the office of the Pope. And just as it's almost like the Holy Spirit comes through the Pope to the church is what we get in that 11th and 12th century. Yeah.
Right. I just say it's so fascinating reading the speeches or listening to the dubbed translations of Putin's speeches in particular of late over the last 10 years or so, when scholars notice he took this civilization of how much he emphasizes the moral integrity of a sustainable nation. If the nation is going to sustain itself, if we as Russians are going to come out of this bleak winter that we experienced for 10 years, under Yeltsin and so on, we're going to have an unshakable moral foundation for our lives. And then he's very clear what the ultimate symbol of that is. It is the Russian Orthodox Church. And it's just so fascinating because when you listen to that, you're hearing that classical frame of reference. Our ultimate goal is to conform our lives to a moral world around us. It's not to reconfigure the world to our own desires and ambitions. The West is trying to do that. No, We've got something wholly different here, which is ironically wholly familiar, which is the essence of what it means to be literally Orthodox in and of itself. It's so fascinating because we just don't have anyone who even among our Christian, the Christian right, it's family values and so forth. It's all been amputated from the church, which is so fascinating. Yeah. Right? All the values seem to just kind of, it's a moralism. They just kind of exist there in society, and there is no civilizational center for it, and Russia doesn't seem to have that issue.